Now that we've talked about the basics of energy systems, let's talk about how your body takes that energy and turns it into movement. The reality is energy is designed for two things like we talked about, survival and movement itself. And that's why being able to move effectively is such a crucial piece to life and performance. And when it comes to conditioning, it's absolutely critical because the movement quality that you have is what determines the cost it takes to move. So worse movement that's more inefficient costs more. In other words, movement limitations increase the cost of the movement. And so we have to understand there's this relationship between energy production, energy expenditure, and movement quality. So when we're talking about movement from the standpoint of conditioning, we really have to understand that part of our objective should be to develop better, more efficient movement patterns as we progress throughout any training program or sport. And the body also learns how to move in different conditions. So we have to understand that our goal as we go through metamorphosis is not just to, again, improve our fitness and therefore automatically our conditioning. It's to improve our fitness in a way that translates to better conditioning. And a big piece of that is that movement piece puzzle. So I'm going to give you two big rocks to focus on here. Again, movement's a huge topic. It could be that there are multiple courses entirely just on movement and mobility. So I'm not going to get into all the potential details of movement, but I want you to focus on two specific areas of movement as you progress through the metamorphosis program. And if you do that, I guarantee you'll see better improvements in your conditioning as a result. So the first one here is always focus on technique. All right. As the body learns how to move, one of the things it strives to do, I should say, is move more efficiently. And so this is a graph of different arm angles in the swimming technique, the swim stroke. And you don't have to understand exactly the movements here, but it's basically showing you a novice on the left versus an expert on the right. And obviously, if I was to ask you which one is more energy efficient, it'd be pretty clear that the expert is more efficient, because what the expert can do is translate their movement into very consistent patterns. They're going to have very predictable and consistent energy costs. The one on the left is creating a lot of erratic and inconsistent movements that are simply wasting energy. So what I want to impress upon you is no matter what conditioning method you're doing in the program, no matter what exercise you are doing, whether that's strength training, metabolic work, any of these other mobility drills, all these things that are being included in metamorphosis, I want you to think about technique. And I don't want you to think about lifting as much weight as you possibly can. I don't want you to think about training at the highest intensity possible. I want you to be thinking about doing both of those things, training hard and training consistently, but always with good technique, because good technique is basically more efficient movement, and it lowers the cost for that movement. So this is really an area I see a lot of people struggle with when it comes to conditioning. They forget all about technique and they just go as hard as they can. And that does not develop this quality of efficient movement. And that's important because there are three different ways or three different categories of movement we can consider. The first would be considered low threshold. So if you're just walking around or you're doing body weight type exercises, these are low threshold movements. These are fairly low force, low power activities, and the movement is fairly low as a result of that. And in this case, you're relying primarily on your slower twitch muscle fibers. And so your body develops movement patterns in these habits. So you develop a gait when you're walking. You have a technique when you do a bodyweight exercise. But as we go up that ladder, we go through what we call higher threshold movements. The furthest higher threshold movement would be a max effort, heavy squat or explosive jump, those sorts of things. This is where you're activating all of your muscle fibers and you're developing different movement patterns as a result. So the best example of this is your movement pattern when you walk is not automatically going to translate to a movement pattern when you sprint that's going to look the same or have the same characteristics. Each different type of activity and different intensity level, the body has specific movement patterns that it develops because it's firing different muscle fibers. So somebody might have a weird gait just to walk, but their sprint mechanics could look really good, or vice versa. You can't automatically assume that a high quality in one area is going to automatically translate into a higher quality in another area. But an area where people often don't think about at all is the fatigued side of things. So as you get tired, really what's happening is certain muscle fibers are no longer able to contract and contribute and generate power. And that's why essentially you produce less power and you slow down, because you don't have the same amount of muscles contracting for the most part. Now, again, because you have different muscle fibers available, the body learns how to move in unique ways based on that fatigue. So you develop what I'd call fatigued movement patterns or fatigued technique, if you want to look at it that way. And the important thing to recognize is that, again, just like learning how to walk more efficiently or learning how to sprint with better mechanics or learning how to lift a weight or do a certain technique in the strength world, we can improve this area. And this is something, again, I really want you to focus on as you progress through metamorphosis. As you get tired, and of course you will get tired as part of the process, rather than just thinking about continuing to go as hard as you can or up in the intensity or whatever, you really need to think about making sure your technique is what it needs to be. So if you're doing a sprinting drill and you're starting to get tired, keep your sprinting technique what it needs to be. If you're doing any sort of exercise where, again, as you're tired, your technique wants to degrade, really take a second to think about improving and maintaining good technique. So the more you focus on building good technical habits, even as you fatigue, the more efficiently you're going to move when you fatigue, and the longer you're going to be able to sustain that power without fatiguing even further. And this has a really big application into sports because, again, if we are playing a sport and we just develop a really bad habit that as soon as we get tired, we start having really poor technique, chances are our performance is going to get a lot worse, our injury risk is going to go up, and everything in between. So one of the things, again, you really need to learn how to do as you progress through metamorphosis is maintain really good movement quality, really good technique across all ranges of intensity. So please think about that as you're progressing through the program and as you're going through the methods that are going to be progressed as you go from week 1 all the way through week 8. Now, the second piece of this, the second big thing to focus on here is reducing movement limitations. And what I mean by that is reducing areas where you can't move very effectively, and thus you give the body fewer options. Now, this comes down to a few different areas here. The first, of course, is just overall mobility. And mobility is not just the soft tissues, but it's also the autonomic nervous system. And we'll talk about that more a bit down the road. But the more mobile you can be, the more movement options and the less limitations you have. This is also tied to breathing, which is going back to the autonomic nervous system I just mentioned. But this is why I've included these movement and breathing drill warm-up, and you can also incorporate them in some of the cool-down methods because this helps develop better respiratory capacity, better breathing patterns, which subsequently allows for better joint mobility. And then the third thing here is tissue quality. So in the Recover to Win section, we're going to talk all about maintaining your tissue, your soft tissue health, ways you can improve it, things you need to be doing. But putting all of these three things together is what gives you movement capacity. And movement capacity, again, is giving the body as many options as possible to move efficiently. If you don't have very good joint mobility, if your breathing patterns aren't very efficient, if your tissues are really tight and wound up, your movement capacity goes down. So our goal here is to reduce movement limitations. And that means, again, incorporating movement, mobility, and the breathing drills into the warm-up and into the cool-down. And again, that's why I've built them into the program so that they serve a very clear purpose. They're meant to help you develop these better patterns, these better habits, these better ways of moving. And then number 2, like I said, take care of your soft tissues with massage techniques and the different strategies. These are, again, a part of the course for a reason, because it's important to manage your overall soft tissues, because again, that is a big limitation in mobility. If you're too tight, you can't move, your soft tissues are wound up, it's going to cause you problems. You're not going to move efficiently, you're going to burn more energy. And then last but not least, there's a reason I've incorporated the medicine ball movements into the program as well. It's because they help you develop mobility and movement across multiple planes of movement and combine all these different axes in ways that allow you to develop better overall movement that's going to translate into more efficient techniques, more efficient movement patterns, and better performance. Ultimately, again, our whole goal here is to lower the cost of movement, right? We're trying to make it so we can move as efficiently as possible with the least amount of energy necessary, because that's going to be the key to being able to sustain it over longer periods of time. So again, movement's a really big topic, but if you focus on just these 2 key main factors, it's really going to go a long way in helping you move efficiently, move effectively, and up your conditioning. So that wraps this section up. Next up, we're going to talk about the mental side of conditioning, and again, how we take our energy systems and our movement and make sure that our mind is on point too.